How's everybody doing? We're going to be talking about fallacies. So we already laid out a lot of ground on logical first principles, which help us recognize truth. Now we're going to talk about first principles, in a sense, though you might not call them that help us recognize falsity or bad arguments. Okay, so if the logical first principles, my framework was called credos, right? And credo stands for causality. The principle of sufficient reason, of cause and effect, principle of motion, objects at rest stay at rest until force acts upon them. The four causes, causality and change, right? Reality and being, metaphysics, the principle of non-contradiction. That's the second bucket. Principle of identity, principle of excluded middle, principle of intelligibility of being, reality is knowing, all these things. And then epistemology and logic, how we reason, principle of definitions, valid inferences, evidence proportion, modality discipline, principle of, the different historical principles. All right. And then direction and purpose, teleology, principle of finality, principle of operation, action follows being, principle of natural inclination, of integral goodness, all of these things, right? And then principles of order in society, ethics and social philosophy, objective morality, freedom and responsibility, subsidiarity, power must be bound, spiritual fruitfulness, etc. And then the sacred, the principle of unity of truth. Truth cannot contradict truth. Public signs warrant reasonable trust, etc. So that was credos, right? We have to talk about how to create arguments. We have to talk about syllogism and deductive arguments and abductive arguments, like inferences to the best explanation and cumulative cases. I don't know if I'm ready to do that yet, but we also have to talk about how to test arguments. So when we're presented with an argument, not when we're formulating an argument, but when we're presented with an argument, we should have a checklist, a procedure, a protocol to evaluate arguments, and this is the proved framework. So P stands for position. So what is the position? What is the conclusion? Formulate it clearly. See if, it should be one claim. It shouldn't be multiple claims. If it is multiple claims, you need to separate them and treat each one individually. Reasons, what are the premises, right? Are the premises true? Observations would be evidence for the reasons, for the premises. Validating rule, the warrant, the bridge. Is the inference valid? Is it a valid form? Do the two premises lead logically to the conclusion, or however many, exceptions, qualifiers, scope, strength. Is there a scope creep? Is there a strength label? Is it, speculative, probable, demonstrated, different types of confidence. Are there boundary conditions, right? And defeaters, what would weaken or kill it, right? So that's the proved framework. We also have a confidence ladder that is very important. How to, maintain modal discipline and keep probability claims in their lane, so things can be, speculative, plausible. Things can be speculative, plausible, probable, best explanation, demonstrated, and certain. So you saw my hand gestures. I'm trying to work that out to always use those. Because we need certain repeatable terms that we can use, so that these don't end up creeping to a higher or lower probability than what is established. Because I've found that is very common. Very common. So now we're going to talk about the framework is called primes. And this is prime stands for person, power, and legitimacy is P. R, and that would be like ad hominem attacks, right? R stands for rhetoric. So this is like sophisms, sophistry. For instance, I'm actually missing a whole category here. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. Oh, we got people here. Say hi in the chat, y'all. Say hi in the chat so I know you're here. Sorry, guys. Just realized that I have a whole bunch of texts that disappeared. Anyways, so R would be if P is persons and power and legitimacy, like ad hominem attacks, when someone attacks you personally instead of attacking the claim. R would be rhetorical manipulation, like word music, slogans, and just vibes. appeal to emotions, arguments from offense, all these things. I would be invalid inference structure. So these are, like circular reasoning, begging the question, false dilemmas, non sequitur, when things don't follow logically, right? Affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent. And M would be metaphysical self-defeat. So metaphysical self-defeat would be something like category confusion. So treating different levels of explanations as if they compete. Reductionism. Neutrality claim when you have smuggled metaphysics. Category mistakes, yeah. Relativism, unfalsifiability. Those would be metaphysical self-defeats. And then E would be, which is very much the longest one, I guess, would be evidence manipulation. So cherry picking, alternative neglect. So a supposed inference with no rival. Testimony weight error. So, modal collapse. One-way skepticism, double standards. And then this type of fallacies there's many different versions, so it's quite long. And then S would be semantics and scope drift, so equivocating, shifting key terms mid-argument, false analogies, dodging definitions, fuzzy boundaries, all that type of stuff. So hey, Isa, I think I saw you before here. How's everybody doing in the chat? This is a weird time to be in the chat. This is 5:25 a.m. here. Why are you guys in the chat at 5:25 a.m.? Where are you? What are you guys going to be doing right now? So let me just clean something up real quick. And you guys know that while I'm doing this, like I'm working these things out, and I know this isn't the most polished. This is actually like a terrible way to do this, I guess, but I'm really like operating at the limit of my understanding. And so, I'm not claiming I have that I completely have mastered this material. Precisely because I haven't mastered it is why I'm trying to teach it, because I'm sure that you've heard that the best way to learn is to teach. But hopefully once I get through all of this, this will be valuable, and I'll present a more a more structured, polished version of this. What's happening in the chat? Anybody here? What's going on, everybody? Y'all here still? That's wild. Let me know what you're doing. Okay, so now we have All right, now we have rhetorical manipulation that we were missing. Okay, let's get into it. This is just 20 minutes in, and now I'm getting into it. I might start a new stream because this was bad. I'm sorry, guys. Virgo Católicos, hi. What are you doing at 5:34 a.m.? I might as well start here. All right. So we're going to talk about bad thinking, okay? Sorry, I need to block some people. I'll do that later. All right. Now we're back. All right, let's talk about bad thinking. Okay, so we talked about, good thinking. If you make an argument or you observe something happening that satisfies the principle of cause and effect, different causes, the principle of sufficient reason, principle of motion, causality in general. The whole world is ruled by causality. The whole of our everyday common experience is a sequence of causes and effects. There's no way to get out of that. And if you do try to get out of that, well, if you have to identify that as bad thinking. And if you get presented with arguments that are, treating something like a brute fact or don't provide any sort of causality for it, you have to recognize that is bad thinking. Same as if something is a contradiction or if something loses its identity, all of these things, if things fulfill, right, just these first principles of logic that you can say this is the truth, then you can have confidence in it. However, this is often not the case, right? So I'm going to help. I'm going to try to help to give a sort of system where you can identify when you're being presented with a bad logic, bad thinking, bad reasoning, so that you don't get caught up in it and you point it out and you snap back at it, okay, and neutralize that position quickly, because this is the important part. When you're in an argument, when you're in a heated discussion, you will be tempted to, if something doesn't make sense, if somebody makes an attack on your character or something like that, or characters of the people, or an attack on the character of peoples that, share the same opinion, you will be, uncomfortable, and you might get angered. You might be irritated. You might lose your cool. You'll get flustered, and you'll stop reasoning correctly, because this happens to everyone in discussions, right? So, under pressure. The more we practice being cool under pressure, the better off we're gonna be. So if we have resources to, help us neutralize those things, and we practice that, when the time comes and we need to use them, we'll have fast recall of them, and we'll be able to create a pause in the discussion, that will help us re-engage and present the counter arguments, right? Instead of just getting stuck in being upset that people aren't staying to the topic, and doing other unethical or illogical thinking, right? So, like I said, let's start with the first thing, so primes, right? Person, power, and legitimacy. The first thing that somebody usually does when in an argument is they attack the character of people, right? They attack the character of people. So when somebody attacks a speaker's character, motives, or identity instead of addressing the argument, so the diagnostic key would be, are they answering the claim or attacking the person? This is an ad hominem attack. This misleads because it swaps truth testing for character judgment. So even flawed people can make true arguments, and even saints can be wrong. So the claim still needs reason. So some modern examples is, of course, you'd say that you're Catholic, or you're just a conspiracy guy, so I'm not listening. You're not educated, so your view doesn't matter. You're biased, therefore you're wrong. So if you want to snap back at this, you can say, attack the argument, not the person. Insult isn't a refutation. Show me where the logic breaks. Okay? You have to recapture the attention, redirect the attention to the claim, to the argumentation, to the evidence. And that takes skill. For instance, the most common thing is that if you hold a Catholic position, you'll be told that there's some priests that are pedophiles. So you have to understand, okay, wait, attack the argument, not the person. So how does that, map onto a claim about, a Catholic position where, the most important thing about Catholicism really is the morality of it. So what happens when we're talking about something, that has a moral consequence, when there are people in this same group that hold this position that don't keep the standard, right? And so you have to know how to defend that. You have to say, hey, this is, this position is based on a truth claim. The truth about, there is a God, you have a soul, the revelation of God is Jesus Christ, and the church you founded is the Catholic Church, and this is a church that we should all be a part of. If there are people within that church that don't hold a standard, this is understandable and expected. There was one Judas, there were 12 apostles, there was one Judas, right? There's plenty of people that keep the standard. Maybe not the majority, maybe it's a third, maybe the other third are trying to keep the standard, and maybe the other third are outright failing at it and not even trying. Who knows, right? But the ratio between, the apostles and Judas was 11-1, and maybe that's still the ratio today, something like that. So you have to know how to defend that. But if you have that snapback of attack the argument, not the person, insult isn't a refutation, show me where the logic breaks, gives you a pause long enough for you to go and redirect the argument in the right direction. But, there's a reason this is the first one, right? I chose this as the first one because this happens a lot. And this is where arguments get, completely sidetracked. All right, the next one is called Bulverism. So Bulverism is assuming the opponent is wrong and then explaining their belief by psychologizing. So this is the difference, right? They're going to try to explain that by psychologizing motives instead of refuting the argument. So if ad hominem attack, a personal attack is something about a person's character, this might not be an attack. Bulverism isn't an attack. It's a sort of psychologizing the motive instead of refuting the argument. So that, diagnostic hockey, again, is relevant. And all of these are going to be very similar. It's going to be, let's go back to the claim. So if you at any point don't know where you stand, you get flustered, you can just say, hey, let's go back to the claim. Let's talk about the claim. Like, prove this, what is wrong with this argument? Why? And we'll talk about evidence is tricky when someone doesn't accept evidence. So then you would have to hold a standard, right? And that requires some more intricate arguments. Anyway, so Bulverism is when someone psychologizes motives instead of refuting the argument. So this misleads because it treats motives, an analysis of the motives, as if it were disproof. Even if someone's motives are messy, the claim can still be true or false on the evidence. Modern examples. You believe in God because you're scared of death. You only think that way because you were raised that way. You just want control, certainty, and meaning. That's your trauma talking. Things like that, right? The snapback would be refute the claim. Don't narrate my psychology. You could also say, like, even if my motives were mixed, the argument still stands or falls. And then, give reasons, not mind reading. So, you could say, if somebody says, if you're saying there's a God and somebody says you believe in God because you're scared of death, and it says, refute the claim that there is a God. Don't narrate my psychology. Okay, there is a necessary being, and then you can go into the offensive. You can say, hey, there's a necessary being called God, the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, which is foundational in reality. We see the interconnectedness of cause and effect. There can't be an infinite regress because it would be like trying to get out of an infinitely deep hole. There are no actual infinities. As soon as you can measure, a finite amount between one moment, and another, that's no longer infinite. That's a finite amount, even if it's a huge number. But it's not an actual infinity. You can't have an infinite regress. Whatever it is, like you can go into that offensive, right? The next one is called the genetic fallacy. So all of these are similar. So this is accepting or rejecting a claim because of where it came from, not because it's true. So the diagnostic hotkey is, are they evaluating the claim or its origin story? This misleads because it confuses sources with validity. A claim can be true even if discovered by the wrong group, and false even if spoken by the right group. Modern example. So the Big Bang came from a priest, so it's religious. Or that's from Fox CNN, so it's automatically false. Or that idea started on Reddit, so it's nonsense. Or it's ancient tradition, so it must be superstition. And again, the snapback would be something like, if it's false, show me where it's false. So, source isn't an argument, evidence is. So refute the claim, not the genealogy. All right, so the Big Bang came from a priest, so it's religious. You could say, refute the claim, not the genealogy. The claim of a, beginning to the universe, of a singularity, of a hot beginning, was first put forth by a Catholic priest who also had a PhD in physics from MIT, Monsignor George Lemaitre. And this has been the cosmological model that has withstood the most attacks, and there's multiple lines of evidence for it. You know, the redshift of distant stars and galaxies pointing to the expansion of the universe in the forward direction of time. If we reverse the arrow of time, the universe was contracting in a singularity. You know, the cosmic microwave background radiation was predicted by the Big Bang model of predicted based on a hot beginning, and then the cosmic microwave background radiation was discovered. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that the universe couldn't have been around forever. And even quantum mechanics, gravity, shows that if the universe was contracting in the reverse direction of time, this would have led to an infinite curvature of space-time. So basically nothing. So out of nothing came everything. That's creation ex nihilo, which is the Catholic position for centuries, creation out of nothing. And so, yeah, maybe Monsignor George Lemaitre's intuition, Catholic intuition, nudged him in the right direction, but that doesn't refute the claim. The claim is the universe had a beginning. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The cause has to be outside of the effect, and this we call God. So if, space-time, matter, and energy had a beginning, the beginning had to be outside of space-time, matter, and energy. This we call God. So, this is a way. Yo, let me know if you're in the chat. I don't know how you freaks are jumping on a YouTube live at 5:51 a.m. But I like it. All right, let's continue. Next one is called poisoning the well. So this is a pre-smearing a person or source so their argument gets dismissed before it's heard. So this would be something like, are they blocking evaluation before it starts? So this rigs the hearing. So you're told the claim is disqualified no matter what the evidence says. It replaces fair testing with a social label. So poisoning the well is kind of like all of these together. It could be an ad hominem attack with genetic fallacy and bulverism all in one. And this could be like, she's paid by industry, so dismiss her data. They're anti-science, don't even listen. That's hate speech, so no need to engage. And you can snap back with, show me the error, not the label. You don't get to dismiss it before you examine it. Stop poisoning the well. Address the evidence. But you can see this is getting a little bit repetitive. So the next one would be the tu quoque, which is, but what about, So this is dodging a critique by pointing to hypocrisy or inconsistency in the opponent. Like, what about you? So did they answer the point or change targets? Is this the tu quoque? So hypocrisy may be real, but it doesn't decide whether the claim is true. It's a diversion that avoids the argument. You criticize materialism, but you have an iPhone. You say greed is bad, but you want money. You talk about truth, but you've lied before. So hypocrisy isn't a refutation. Even if this could be the snapback. Hypocrisy isn't a refutation. Even if I'm inconsistent, the claim can still be true. Deal with the claim. Answer the argument, and we can talk about the behavior. And this is important because, like I've said before, and I will say many times more, what we really want to do is affirm truth and deny falsity. And this type of fallacy normalizes post-truth. That's what it does. Normalizes relativism, being unmoored from objective reality. The next fallacy is called a misused appeal to authority. So the explanation is treating an expert as decisive, especially outside their field or against the weight of evidence. The diagnostic could be, are we getting reasons or just a resume? So credentials can guide attention, but they don't replace argument. Experts disagree, they overreach, and they can be wrong. So claims still need premises and evidence. So modern examples are, this biologist says metaphysics is nonsense, case closed. Or a celebrity doctor said it, so it's settled. Or he has a PhD, so you can't question him. Or trust the experts, used as a substitute for explanation. So some snapbacks could be, experts aren't arguments. Quote the reasons, not the credentials. Authority isn't proof. Show the logic. All right, person's power and legitimacy. Number 7, bandwagoning. Treating popularity or majority opinion as proof of truth. The diagnostic is this evidence or a head count? So this misleads because popularity measures social force, not reality. Consensus is often asserted without showing the actual argument and evidence underneath it. Some modern examples. Most scientists assume materialism, so the soul doesn't exist. Everyone knows religion is outdated, so it's false. The internet agrees, so you're wrong. If you were right, more people would believe it. So some snapbacks. Consensus isn't truth. Count evidence, not heads. Consensus can guide, but it doesn't settle. What's the argument? All right, the next one is like bandwagoning and an appeal to authority, but this would be an appeal to law. So equating legal status with moral truth. It's legal, so it's right. The diagnostic would be, did they prove it's good or just permitted? This misleads because law answers what's allowed, not what's righteous. Laws can be unjust, corrupt, or lag behind moral truth. Modern examples. It's legal, so it's not wrong. The court approved it, so it's moral. Policy says it's fine, so stop questioning it. It's legal in Europe, so it's ethical. Some common snapbacks. Legal does not mean moral. Show me why it's right, not why it's legal. Unjust laws exist. Make the moral argument. All right, the next one is chronological snobbery. And this is treating old ideas as false because they're old, or new ideas as true because they're new. So are they refuting the argument or the era? This misleads because truth isn't updated by the decade. Modern can mean fashionable, not correct. Traditional can be hard-won data, not mere nostalgia. So modern examples, that's medieval, so it's nonsense. Or we're past religion, grow up. Or ancient ethics can't apply today. Or traditional metaphysics is primitive compared to science. Some snapbacks, don't confuse modern with correct. If it's false, show me where it breaks. Refute the claim, not the calendar. The next one is reductio ad Hitlerum. So this is discrediting a view by associating it with Nazis or Hitler or any hated group instead of addressing the argument. So the diagnostic would be something like, is this a refutation or a smear by association? So guilt by association is not logic. Even evil people can believe true statements. What matters is whether the reasons and inferences are valid. Modern examples. That sounds like Nazis, so it's wrong. Or bad regimes use that idea, therefore it's evil. Or if you think that, you're basically fascist. Or that's far right coded. No need to engage. Again, these are all very similar. Name the flaw in the argument, not the villain. Even bad people can state true things. Show me where the logic breaks. All right, so all of that was very, very similar. It just helps you, it helps you identify what it is that you're being presented with. And so hopefully also it gives you a pause where you can deal with the attack. It's really an attack without stressing too much about it and wasting too much energy, and then be able to redirect the argument to evidence and logic. All right, so the next category of logical fallacies in the prime system. So the first one, P, is persons and power. R stands for rhetorical manipulation. So these fallacies don't directly deny evidence, but they bypass it with vibes and pressure and distraction and debate tricks. They can sound persuasive while quietly dodging the claim. So, I'm sorry, guys. Rhetorical manipulation, word music. So this is using slogans, catchphrases, and applause lines as if they were reasons. Sounds good, therefore true. So the diagnostic hotkey for this would be, where are the premises? What is the inference? What is the argument? This misleads because it replaces evidence and inference with vibes and social pressure. The phrase feels like a conclusion, but it never builds a case. Some examples. Trust the science. Used to shut down questions instead of showing the data. That's misinformation as a label in place of an argument. It's settled. Case closed. Everybody knows this, without citing what actually settles it. So some snapbacks would be, that's a slogan, not a reason. Give me premises, not catchphrases. Cite the evidence, don't chant. Show me the inference, not the vibe. Okay, the next one is appeal to emotion. Rhetorical manipulation 2, appeal to emotion. So this is treating feelings, fear, pity, anger, outrage, disgust, offense, as if they prove a claim true or false. Emotions can matter, but they don't establish facts by themselves. So the diagnostic for this would be, is this evidence or a mood? So this misleads because it pressures assent by moving you instead of proving the claim. It swaps this feels bad or good for this is true or false. Modern examples, if you don't support this policy, people will die, as a moral cudgel without causal evidence. That idea is dangerous as a substitute for showing it's false. Only a monster would disagree to force compliance by shame. Some snapbacks would be, that's a feeling, not a refutation. Emotion is an evidence. What's the argument? Name the claim and give reasons. I hear the emotion, now claim reasons and evidence. The next rhetorical manipulation is an argument from offense. This is the classic I'm offended, or that's harmful, as if it refutes the claim. Discomfort becomes proof the statement must be wrong. Diagnostics would be, is the objection false or just I hate it, right? This misleads because offense is a reaction, not a truth test. It turns debate into emotional veto power. Modern examples. That's offensive. It's not true in moral anthropological debates. You can't say that, replacing an actual rebuttal. That language is violence, used to end discussion without addressing the content. Some snapbacks would be, you being offended doesn't decide the truth. Being offended isn't an argument. Refute the claim. Don't report your reaction. Tell me what's false, not what's offensive. So you see here, bringing back the conversation, the discussion, like pulling the attention back to the claim and the argument is really important, because things often get sidelined. Very often get sidelined. All right, the next one is similar. This is rhetorical manipulation argument from trauma. So using past harm as a blanket verdict. I was hurt, therefore these claims are false. Compassion is required, but logic still needs reasons. So the diagnostic would be, does the story refute the claim? So this misleads because it collapses this wounded me into therefore it's false, skipping the truth question, and can silence debate by making disagreements look like cruelty. Modern examples. Religion hurt me, so all religious claims are false. Or you can't challenge this, people have trauma, used to block evaluation. Because this reminds me of pain, it must be wrong. So snapbacks would be something like, I'm sorry that happened, but it doesn't refute the claim. Trauma deserves care, but it doesn't decide what's true. Your pain is real, your conclusion still needs reasons. We can honor your story without canceling the logic. So rhetorical manipulation, and now we're moving past that. I know it sounds a little bit repetitive, but now we're moving past it, and now we're going into different types of categories, and this is called moving the goalpost. So this type of rhetorical manipulation shows up when evidence is given and the critic changes the standard to something harder or unreachable. The test changes after you start meeting it. This is extremely common. Extremely common. This is actually a whole nother category of evidence manipulation. So we have to, this is the main reason I am doing all of this is because of this. Okay, the main reason I am laying out my framework of first logical first principles as ways to validate truth, and logical fallacies as ways to disarm bad arguments, is because I'm trying to create common ground that we can agree on. If we can agree on first principles, if we can agree 2 + 2 = 4, we can share common ground, we can advance step by step, and then meet our disagreements when they're still very slight, and because if we start debating between is there a God or is there not a God, that we're too far apart. The position there's no God, and the position there is one God, and the position there are many gods, are so far apart that we can't even begin to reconcile. We have to come back to common ground. 2 + 2 = 4, cause and effect, right, etc., and then build from there where the separations are smaller. Because what happens if you start talking about is there a God, is there not a God, or any major high stakes argument, people will move the goalposts. They'll say that the standard for evidence for them is different than for the, opposing claim. And this gets nowhere. Whereas if we agree on first principles and we say the standard is the standard, if we can agree on the standard, especially of evidence, then we can't move the goalposts. So I'm preemptively fixing the goalpost, saying, hey, we can agree on all of these first principles. And if there's one that we can't agree on, okay, fine, let's disagree on this one. Okay, get it. Wonderful. We can't agree on the principle of sufficient reason. You claim that there are things that are brute facts, that they just are. Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting, because you would think that there would be, forces now in operation that would display that reality, or the reality of randomness producing something. But precisely the opposite is true. We see consistently the reality that all of our common everyday experiences an interconnected network of cause and effect, right? So we're debating a principle in the abstract and concrete, right? We're accepting it or not, and then we're accepting the implications. Whereas if we try to actually address, the fact that there has to be an unmoved mover and uncaused cause, and this we call God, that is way too far from, both views, because there's also an emotional component to it. So it's a worldview is a commitment of the heart. So this completely, this completely sabotages clear thinking. Whereas if we start with clear thinking, then we can rein the heart in, if that makes sense. So moving the goalposts. Let me take a sip of my coffee. So moving the goalposts. When evidence is given, the critic changes the standard to something harder or unreachable. The test changes after you start meeting it. So the diagnostic is, what would count as evidence or a valid argument? And did it just change? So this misleads because it makes resolution impossible, because the finish line moves. It preserves the conclusion by redefining proof every time progress is made. So some modern examples. Okay, you showed X, but now prove Y and Z. And that'll be a different category of fallacies. That would be also, I think, Sorites, Gish Gallop. When people dump a million reasons and you have to go one by one. You got to stop and say, we got to go one by one. We can't address 100 different things at the same time and then move on thinking that they're valid when they're not. So we have to go claim by claim. We cannot advance until we address each claim. Because then what you're doing is you're smuggling a bunch of claims and then assuming that they're valid claims just because you listed them off. Anyways, or that study doesn't count. Only randomized trials after accepting other evidence earlier. Like, different. You could swap the type of evidence. Like testimony. That testimony doesn't count, but my testimony does. This happens often with historical claims for miracles, because the skeptic will say something like, they'll say? They'll say something like, there's a phrase. It's something like, big claims require big evidence, or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Okay, so this is something that skeptics will often. This comes from Carl Sagan, and this is something that skeptics will often say. So because the resurrection, and the worst part is that it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, because we do have we have extraordinary evidence for the resurrection. We have the Turin Shroud. We have extraordinary evidence for miracles. We have Lourdes and Fatima and Guadalupe. So, anyways, you'll hear extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But anyways, like things like the miracles of Jesus, right? What do we have as evidence for the miracles of Jesus? We have 4 manuscripts, the 4 Gospels, written within eyewitness testimony, right? But people don't, what do they want? They want like a monument, and I don't know what an extraordinary claim would be. Like all of the testimony, all of the evidence we have for history is testimony and artifacts. And so what would be an extraordinary claim? Like an angel, with like a visible angel reminding everyone that Jesus, healed someone's blindness or something. And we have medical miracles not all the time, but we have loads of medical miracles. Anyways, how's the chat doing? So modern examples, like I believe it when, and then they keep shifting evidence from certainty to, impossible demands for certainty. So some snapbacks would be like, name the standard now. If it changes, you're moving the goalposts. Or what would count as proof? Like say it up front. Stop changing the test after I pass it. Or we agreed on X. I gave X, don't switch to Y. Like we agreed on evidence. I gave you evidence, don't switch to mathematical proof or something like that. So this is all a lot of this is evidence manipulation. All right, rhetorical manipulation, red herring. So this is dragging in an irrelevant issue to distract from the actual question. It changes the subject while pretending to answer. This misleads because, the diagnostic would be, how does that change this conclusion exactly? This misleads because it feels like movement, but it's lateral motion. The audience forgets the original claim, and the speaker escapes the burden of answering. Modern examples: debating abortion ethics, and someone pivots the Crusades or the Inquisition. So discussing evidence, and someone switches to, but your side is hypocritical. And questioning a policy's result, and someone pivots to an unrelated scandal. So some snapbacks. That's a different issue. Stay on the claim. That's irrelevant. Answer the question we're on. That's a topic change, not a refutation. Name the link. If there's no link, drop it. Okay, so this is the next one is Rhetorical Manipulation 5, Gish Gallop. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about moving the goalposts. So overwhelming with a rapid fire list of shallow points to bury the issue under quantity. It aims to win by speed, not strength. The diagnostic would be, can we slow down and test one claim at a time? This misleads because the listener confuses many claims with strong support. The format prevents careful checking. Modern examples. There are so many reasons Christianity is false and whatever. A common thread that drops 12 links and demands immediate concession. Or a debate clip that machine guns accusations to prevent rebuttal. Some snapbacks. Pick your best one or two claims and we'll go deep, not wide. So one at a time. What's your strongest point? List making isn't arguing. Choose one and defend it. Slow down. Which point actually carries the conclusion? All right, Rhetorical Manipulation 6, Moat and Bailey. And this is very difficult. When you see someone do a Moat and Bailey, which is like bait and switch, you're dealing with a good debater. Okay, so oftentimes when I discuss with people, dialectics, I usually, what really happens is you get people asserting themselves just by force or moving the goalposts. That might be a little bit more sophisticated. But switch and bait, Moat and Bailey, this is the mark of an experienced debater, manipulator, and also when people do Moat and Bailey, when people do bait and switch, this is a sign that they're dishonest. So what is Moat and Bailey, bait and switch? So this is making a bold, controversial claim, then retreating to a safer, weaker claim when challenged. The strong claim pressures, the safe claim escapes. This happens a lot in evolution. So the diagnostic is like, which claim are you defending, the bold one or the safe one? Okay? So this misleads because it smuggles a sweeping thesis into the room and then it refuses to defend it. The speaker wants credit for the strong claim while only proving the weak one. Okay? For instance, evolution shows micro adaptations to a species. Therefore, God did not create life. Okay? So the safe claim is that evolution, presents micro adaptations in species. The bold claim is, life came out of random processes or something like that. That, God did not create life. Anybody here? Y'all here still? So as you can see, this Mote and Bailey requires, usually previous experience with the subject. You're gonna have to identify common, which is why it's good to learn about, learn about the same subject from different positions. Because if you get surprised by a Mote and Bailey bait and switch, you might not be able to respond to it the first time. Other examples, like science proves there's no purpose. Or, and then they would like science proves there's no purpose, and then that would be the bold claim, and then they would retreat to something like, I just mean that we don't know the purpose. Or the bold claim of like, free will is an illusion. And then they retreat into like, I only mean behavior has causes. Others could be like, bold claim, the Bible is full of contradictions. And then they retreat to, I only mean some passages are hard. So a snapback, because once they present that, it's like the damage is already done, right? So like I said, this is a different tier of difficulty, I guess, that has to be treated. It has to be treated precisely. So some snapbacks would be, stop switching claims. Which one are you defending? Pick one, the strong claim or the safe claim. So you said X, now you're backing into Y. Which one is it? So if you only mean the safe version, drop the bold version. And this is, this also kind of maps into scope drift or equivocation, shifting the burden of proof. All right. Next one would be rhetorical manipulation 7, slippery slope. So this is claiming a small step will inevitably trigger a chain of worse outcomes without showing the links. It treats could like will. So this is also, we're going to talk about modal collapse and keeping modal discipline, which is, if we're talking about probabilities, because there's very little, so when we talk about arguments, right? And evidence in general, okay? There's a very small, domain of reality that we can actually use deduction, which is like certainty, right? That we can be, this 100% is true, right? Like we can only really do that with mathematics, like 2 + 2 = 4. Because if that weren't true, there would be a whole host of things that would collapse. When we talk about anything meaningful, we're really talking about degrees of certainty. And so we have to have a way to have modal discipline. This modality means like the probability of something and it being consistently treated as whatever it was that, that probability which it was, proved to be. Like if something is speculative, it's speculative. That doesn't mean probable. It means that is like a wild, very small probability. That's speculative. If it's probable, that is, more than 50-50, right? So let's talk a little bit again about modality. So this is the confidence ladder. I use hand gestures for this, okay? Speculative. This is speculative. Maybe, but it's a hard maybe, right? There's actually like very little chances that's the case. It's speculative. Plausible, a little bit more probable than speculative. There's reasons to believe that could be. It could not be. There's probably more reasons it could not be than it could be, but it could be, right? Plausible. Probable, 50-50. It could be either or. Probable. Best explanation means we compared explanations. This seems to be the best explanation. Demonstrated, this has been demonstrated in the past to be true. Maybe it's not true now, but this has been demonstrated in the past to be true. And certain is undeniable. Okay, so these are, if something has been proved certain, you don't then change that, you know? So speculative, plausible, probable, best explanation, demonstrated, certain. Certain, demonstrated, best explanation, probable, plausible, speculative. Let's go back to slippery slope. So claiming a small step will inevitably trigger a chain of worse outcomes. Without showing the links, it treats could like will. So the diagnostic hocket is like, show the chain, where's the mechanism? So this misleads because it manufactures certainty out of fear. All right, rhetorical manipulation, slippery slope. So claiming a small step will inevitably trigger a chain of worse outcomes without showing the links. It treats could like will. So show the chain. What's the diagnostic? Show the chain. Where's the mechanism? So this misleads because it manufactures certainty out of fear. Instead of proving causation and probability, it relies on vague escalation. Some modern examples. If we allow X, society will collapse with no mechanism or data. If you question this policy, you're enabling extremists, jumping steps. If you accept evolution, you must accept nihilism, as if it's automatic. Some snapbacks. Show the links. Don't just gesture at doom. That's could, not will, prove inevitability. Name the mechanism, not the fear. What's the probability and what evidence supports it? All right, so that was rhetorical manipulation. Now we're going to talk about invalid inferences. Invalid inferences and structure. So these fallacies corrupt reasoning not by distraction, which was rhetorical manipulation, or status attack, which was person or power ad hominem attacks, but by breaking the form of the inference itself. This pretends to argue, but it sneaks in conclusions. It excludes live options, and it builds bridges that aren't really there. All right, circular reasoning. Begging the question. Now this... So the conclusion is in circular reasoning, begging the question. The explanation is the conclusion is smuggled into a premise, and the reasoning chases its tail. This could be something like, if God exists, who created God? It's like, wait, you're getting the category wrong. God wasn't created. God is whatever. That's also a different type of fallacy. It would be a category mistake. So the diagnostic is, what premise is just the conclusion in disguise? For example, miracles can't happen because nature is closed. But the closure of nature is what's at issue. This misleads because it looks like proof, but it only assumes what it must prove. Circular arguments never leave their starting gate. So circular reasoning feels like proof, but it never leaves its starting point. Some snapbacks, for the example, miracles can't happen because nature is closed. It's like, okay, so you just assume nature is closed. That's the whole dispute. Show me how you believe, why you believe it's closed. What evidence rules out miracles instead of defining them out? So, position, miracles can't happen. Reason, nature is closed. So, justify nature is closed without assuming miracles can't happen. Right? And we actually have reasons to believe that nature is not closed. Just the fact that there's something rather than nothing. All right. Okay, the next one would be, I had another example for begging the question. So smuggling the conclusion into a premise by defining away final causes. Where the diagnosis would be, did you delete final cause by definition and call it science? So for example, nature is purposeless because only efficient causes are real. So this misleads because it assumes the very thing under dispute, and then calls it neutral. Anyway. All right, the next category is a false dilemma. presenting only two options when others exists, forcing a fake either or. So what's the third option they're not allowing? Either evolution explains everything or God does nothing. So, for instance, capitalism is the reason there's so much wrong in the world. We need a government for the people. Snapback. Okay, that's a false dichotomy. Left and right, the actual dichotomy is good versus evil. And when you talk about good versus evil, you're automatically making a metaphysical statement, meaning there's more than just things in the world. There's a reality with good and evil as the highest good. And the highest good would be God, who loved us into existence and who draws us toward his goodness, truth, and beauty. And the highest evil is opposed to God. So it narrows reason. Often the truth involves a third or layer alternative. So why would I associate God and goodness and the highest goodness? This is like a super long argument. So if we look at the most powerful force in humans, you could say, greed and envy. You could also say love. Love casts out fear. It's unbelievable what people do out of love, the sacrifices. You just got to look at parents, right? Even if there's evil in the world, the reason there's anything at all is because of love. So if we think of the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover, showing an enormous power and providence for his creation, we would consider love as the main power. Especially if we think of Jesus as the revelation of God. And we also make that argument from desire. Like we desire the highest good, the highest truth, the highest beauty. We want more and more of it. We can't get enough of it. We can make an argument from desire and an argument from final causes that if we desire that so much, it's because we're meant for that. When we're meant for that highest truth, the highest goodness, the highest beauty, which we consider God. This could be our direction in teleology. And we were created by the highest truth, the highest good, the highest beauty. So we're created by God for God. All the world gives glory to God, either for his mercy or for his justice. And I know that was a very concise argument, and there would be a lot to unpack there, but I don't know, I just blurted that. Okay, the next bad invalid structure inference example would be the non sequitur. So the conclusion does not follow from the premises. The diagnostic would be something like, what does that have to do with the conclusion? Name the bridge. For example, the church has sinners, therefore her doctrines are false. The snapback is that doesn't necessarily follow. Sinners don't refute the truth claims of the church and the doctrines. And not all of them are sinners. I mean, they're all sinners, but they're not all equally sinners. Some are less sinful than others. So that's a non sequitur. You're moving from a fact about people, some members sin, to a claim about truth. The teachings are false. That jump only works if you add a missing bridge, like if an institution has sinners, then its doctrines must be false. But that bridge is obviously false. Every human group has sinners. So refute the teachings on evidence and reasoning, not by pointing at the failures of the people. Now, this misleads because it uses moral failure as a shortcut to avoid actually engaging the truth claim. So we have to state the hidden warrant out loud. We have to state the bridge. We have to state the if I were to say a syllogism like, Socrates is, all men are mortal, major premise. Socrates is a man, minor premise. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Oh, we could say, well, the term man is distributed completely in the major premise as all men are mortal. Socrates, being a member of the class men, is included in that distributed middle term. Therefore, the conclusion follows, right? So we can state a valid bridge, a valid inference, make it clear. Now, when we're looking at an invalid inference, invalid structure, we have to be able to do the same thing. So like if you say, let's say, all humans are, let's say, all Romans are human. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is Roman. Well, that doesn't follow because the term human is not distributed completely in the class Romans. There are humans that are not Romans. In fact, Socrates is not a Roman. He's Greek. Okay, so if we go back to our church example, the church has sinners, like the church claims, So the church claims, the church claims that it teaches morality. Some church members do not practice morality. Therefore, the church is false, right? So the church claims to teach morality, but some of its members don't live up to the moral standards. Therefore, the church is false. Okay, so the church teaches morality. That premise we can agree. Some members of the church don't live up to the standards. That premise we can agree on. Therefore, the church is false. I deny that conclusion because the term, moral teachings is distributed in the church, but that does not, the term, sinners, people that don't keep the standard of morality, does not refute the moral teachings. It actually, shows us that we need moral teaching. I don't know. That was off the cuff. So we can think of something like science explains how things work, therefore God doesn't exist. And the snapback would be like, that does not follow. How doesn't cancel why. That's a non sequitur. From science explains mechanisms, you can't conclude there is no God unless you add a missing bridge. Like, if we have a natural mechanism, then there is no ultimate cause or purpose. But that bridge is a metaphysical claim, and it's not proven by science itself. Mechanism and ultimate explanations are different levels. If you want the atheist conclusion, you have to argue for that hidden bridge, not assume it. So it misleads because it smuggles in a worldview premise. Mechanism excludes God without defending it. So you have to force the missing warrant into the daylight. If a natural explanation exists, then no transcendent explanation can exist. Now we can evaluate the claim instead of pretending it's just science. Okay, so we have here some forms that break down. For instance, affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent. For instance, if we have a valid form of if then, if I'm thinking, then I exist. I am thinking, therefore I exist. A bad example would be, if it's raining, the ground is wet. The ground is wet, therefore it's raining. This would be affirming the consequent. The wet ground doesn't prove rain. The ground could have been wet because of a sprinkler, a hose, melting snow. If you want rain, you have to rule out alternatives or move into inference to the best explanation, but that is not a valid deduction. Denying the antecedent would be something like, if a valid form of if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. If the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. If P, then Q. If the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. Not Q, the dog did not bark. Therefore, the intruder was not a stranger. So, saying that, okay, so this is the valid form. The bad example would be, if the intruder were a stranger, the dog would have barked. The intruder was not a stranger, therefore the dog did not bark. So not a stranger doesn't mean no bark. That's denying the antecedent. If P then Q, you can't conclude if not P then not Q. So if there was an intruder and the intruder was not a stranger, if the intruder was a stranger, the dog would have barked. But if there was no intruder, or if the dog was sleeping, it would also have not barked. So there not being a bark does not mean there was no intruder. So affirming the consequent, Q doesn't prove P, the result could have had other causes, right? If the ground is wet, it's raining. The ground is wet could have been caused by other causes. That's affirming the consequent. And denying the antecedent is, there was no bark. or let me see. Denying the antecedent, if the intruder were a stranger, doesn't mean the dog did not bark, or doesn't mean the dog would not bark. The dog not barking could still have happened if the dog was asleep. I know that's not clear. I obviously don't have it very clear either. All right. The next one is called special pleading, ad hoc exception. So this creates an exception to shield a claim from critique. Rules change only when it gets uncomfortable. So do rules change only when it gets uncomfortable? The core tell of this rule applies to everything except my view when it's under pressure. This is special pleading. For instance, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, except when my side makes the claim, right? Because the skeptic will be like, oh no, randomness and quantum fluctuations. Well, where is that randomness in operation? Where can I see it in operation? Because all I see is causality. So the snapback is you just exempted your own claim. So the snapback expanded would be that special pleading. You're applying a strict rule to what you dislike and then relaxing or ignoring the same rule when it threatens your view. Either the standard applies to both sides or it is not a real standard. So this forces the standard into the open. So you have to state the rule in one sentence. Does the rule apply to your claim too? If not, what's the principled reason for the exception? And this is, other things like shifting the burden of proof or loaded standards or one-way skepticism is another way of identifying this. Some modern examples, like only physical explanations count, except when the physical explanations don't work. Then we call it emergence and move on. For instance, origin of life. Stellar, what's it called? Like the carbon resonance and stellar nucleation. So emergence isn't a free pass. You have to explain it. Like mind from just physical experiences, like self-consciousness. There's no materialistic explanation for that. I mean, just, near-death experiences, the persistence of consciousness after bodily death. So some modern examples: testimony is unreliable except when it supports what I already believe. Snapback would be same standards for both sides. That's special pleading. If testimony is unreliable, apply that across the board. If you only distrust it when it's inconvenient, that's not skepticism, it's selective disbelief. So this misleads because it weaponizes a standard instead of applying it consistently. Okay, this next one is called ad hoc immunization rescue device. This is bolting on an untestable auxiliary claim solely to shield a theory from counter evidence. This is similar to bait and switch, Moat and Bailey. So does this patch predict anything new or only save the theory? So if the evidence goes against my view, I'll add an invisible add-on so it can't lose. For example, the fine-tuning argument. Fine-tuning doesn't suggest design because there are infinitely many undetectable universes. So this misleads because it converts a challenge into an escape hatch. No new test, no new risk, just a protected theory. The snapback would be, that's a rescue patch, not an explanation. That's ad hoc immunization. You added an untestable extra claim to protect your theory from counter evidence. There's no observable multiverse. This is just a theory. And furthermore, it's a theory based on string theory, which hasn't proved anything in 60 years. String theory is from the 60s. So does your patch predict anything new we could check, or does it only make the theory impossible to refute? Because if you posit a claim that's impossible to refute, then you're not positing anything. If you predict everything, you're not predicting anything. So you have to force new risk. What observation would count against your patch? What new prediction does it generate? What would we expect to see differently if your patch were true? This also maps onto unfalsifiability and special pleading. Some modern examples: there's no evidence because the evidence was destroyed by the people covering it up. This snapback would be something that convenient. What would disprove it? I think that's going to happen with the Epstein files, but who knows? That's an immunization move. You're explaining away the absence of evidence with an untestable cover story. If your theory can explain every possible outcome, it explains nothing. This misleads because it turns missing evidence into automatic confirmation. No discipline test remains. All right, nuking the field. This is a fallacy that demands an extreme standard of proof that destroys not only the claim at hand, but the very fields of knowledge they themselves rely on. The diagnostic would be like, if we apply your rule everywhere, does it wipe out things you already trust? For example, if a testimony rule is too harsh, a claim would be something like, eyewitness reports can't be trusted, so miracle accounts are worthless. And the snapback, simply stated, would be, you're nuking the field. Like, you're saying that eyewitness reports can't be trusted is like saying that, you can't have eyewitnesses at a trial. Like, this doesn't make sense. You're nuking the field. If eyewitness testimony is worthless across the board, you just erase courts, history, journalism, everyday life. The right move is to weight testimony, early versus late, independent versus dependent, corroborated versus uncorroborated, not to ban the entire category. So this misleads because it replaces discipline weighing with a blanket ban that collapses real knowledge domains. All right, example 2, repeatability absolutism. So claim only repeatable lab experiments count as real knowledge. Snapback would be then you just killed half of science, because the standard nukes the field. Astronomy, geology, paleontology, forensic science study unique past events and traces, not lab repeatable events. They still use real evidence, predictions, consilience, measurement, inference. Your rule is too blunt for reality. So this misleads because it applies one tool, lab repeatability, as if it's the only tool, despite many legitimate sciences being traced, based, and historical. Example 3, impossible certainty demand. Claim, unless you can prove God with 100% mathematical certainty, I won't believe. The snapback simply would be, then you can't know anything historical. That nukes the field. If you demand mathematical certainty for every belief, you can't rationally accept any historical claim, any courtroom verdict, or most scientific conclusions about unique events. Rational belief is often proportional. Deduction, where possible, and otherwise cumulative evidence and best explanation. So this misleads because it confuses certainty with rational warrant, and it collapses real-world reasoning into paralysis. So this misleads because the overreach, the rule doesn't just attack one claim, it torches whole knowledge domains. So the category error, it forces lab-style proof onto history, testimony, metaphysics, or unique events. And there's a hidden asymmetry because it's used as a weapon against disliked claims and then quietly ignored for favored beliefs. So they'll acknowledge testimony for their claims, but they won't acknowledge testimony for claims that they don't favor. So you add one question, you ask one question. Do you apply that standard to everything you believe or only to what you dislike? And then you give it a squeeze. You say, name 3 things you believe that would fail your standard. Because you believe testimony from other people. So if you were to believe something and it's warranted by testimony, then you just you just validated testimony. So snapback line, you're nuking the field. Your rule would wipe out history, courts, and science. All right, the next invalid inference fallacy is loaded standards. So the explanation here is framing definitions or debate rules so one side is automatically winning or unfalsifiable. The diagnostic would be, who wrote the rules and do they already guarantee the conclusion? For example, science deals with facts, religion only with faith. Therefore, science always wins. This misleads because the conclusion is smuggled in through biased terms. Example, science versus religion rigged definition. Claim, science deals with facts, religion only with faith. Therefore, science always wins. The snapback would be like, you rigged the definitions. The snapback expanded would be, you rigged the definitions. You defined facts so only science get them, and you define faith like it means no reasons. That guarantees your conclusion before we even look at evidence. So refute the claim itself, don't win by writing the rules. Truth does not contradict truth. Faith and reason harmonize. Why this misleads, it relabels one side as facts and the other as non-facts, then calls the verdict objective. So example 2, historical loaded standards. Claim, if it's not confirmed by contemporary Roman government documents, it didn't happen. Snapback, that's a loaded standard. That's a loaded standard because you picked a requirement you know will be missing for most ancient events. If we used your rule consistently, we'd erase huge chunks of ancient history. The real standard is proportional, multiple sources, proximity, independence, corroboration, context. This misleads because it chooses an impossible narrow evidence gate that pre-eliminates entire categories of historical knowledge. Example 3, moral debate loaded standards. Claim, if you can't prove it harms someone in a measurable way, it's not wrong. Snapback would be, you're smuggling a moral theory. You're smuggling a moral theory. You're assuming only measurable harm counts morally. And that already decides the debate. That's not a neutral rule. It's a philosophical claim that needs defending. This misleads because it treats a contestable moral framework as if it were a neutral rule of reasoning. This misleads because you win by redefining terms, not by arguing. Rule setting as a verdict. The standard already contains the conclusion, and it presents as fake neutrality. The framework pretends to be neutral while importing a worldview. So you have to ask questions. You have to define key terms, and this is a whole different category, which is semantics and scope drift. So you define your key terms, facts, faith, science, religion, in one sentence each. And then, why should I accept your standard as neutral rather than philosophical or, partial to you? So if they can't answer, you've exposed the rig. So these fallacies all fail at the skeleton level. They smuggle conclusions, circularity, they block off options, false dilemmas, they drop the bridge, non sequitur, they commit formal errors, affirming the consequent or denying the antecedent, or they rig the game with standards that destroy rational inquiry, like nuking the field, loaded standards. So if you spot them and you force arguments to stand or fall on real reasoning, not broken forms. All right, the next category is called mechanism, or does not equal ultimate explanation. This is level confusion. So this is treating different levels of explanation as if they compete. Like if we have a mechanism, we've eliminated purpose. Or if biology explains how, God is excluded. So which causes are we talking about? Material, formal, efficient, final. Are we deleting final causes by definition? Did we confuse mechanisms with ultimate explanation? This misleads because it turns a layered explanation into a zero-sum fight, as if a how automatically cancels a why. For instance, evolution explains biodiversity, therefore God didn't create. So a mechanism does not cancel a creator. You're mixing levels. Evolution is a proposed mechanism, a how story about change over time. Creation is an ultimate claim why anything exists, why nature has order, why laws hold, why reality is intelligible. A how explanation doesn't erase a why explanation. Refute theism directly. Don't assume mechanism excludes ultimate cause. So what's the hidden bridge they're smuggling? If a natural mechanism exists, then God is not involved. That premise is not science, it's metaphysics. So example 2, mind and morality. Claim, neuroscience explains morality, therefore morality isn't real. The snapback is, you explain the wiring, not the validity. The snapback expanded would be like, you're confusing description with justification. Brain science can study how moral judgments happen in us, correlates development biases, that doesn't settle whether moral truths are real or whether some acts truly are right or wrong. A mechanism of moral perception doesn't automatically cancel moral reality, any more than a mechanism of vision cancels the reality of what you see. So what's the hidden bridge they're smuggling? If we can explain a belief's cause, the belief is false. So this would also nuke math, logic, and science itself. Example 3, general science did it. Claim, science explains X, therefore God isn't needed. So you're answering how and pretending you're answered why. You're switching questions. Science often gives efficient cause accounts, mechanisms inside nature. God talk classically is about the ground of nature, why there are laws, why there is something rather than nothing, why causes exist at all. Not needed only follows if you assume a worldview where ultimate explanation is forbidden in advance. What's the hidden bridge they're smuggling? Only mechanistic explanations count as real explanations. And that's a loaded philosophical rule. So a clean teaching frame so mechanism category level confusion. So category level confusion is when someone treats levels of explanation like rival teams. Like efficient causes don't cancel final causes. Mechanisms don't erase meaning. Secondary causes don't compete with the first cause. The tell is the leap from we found a mechanism to therefore there is no purpose, no God, no real morality. That's a huge leap. All right, the next mechanism fallacy is reductionism. Nothing but. So the explanation is collapsing higher realities into lower parts, deleting formal causes and final causes, and acting like material causes and efficient cause exhaust the whole reality. This misleads because nothing but talk flattens reality. Ingredients and mechanisms don't automatically explain form, what the thing is as a unified whole, or end, what it is for, what its powers are ordered toward. So a snapback would be like, you gave ingredients and a mechanism, but you didn't explain the form or the end. That's reductionism. Listing parts and processes doesn't fully explain the thing as a unified reality or what its powers are ordered toward. You described material and efficient causes. You haven't accounted for the form that makes it this kind of thing or that, and the ends that make its power intelligible. For example, the mind is nothing but neurons. The snapback would be, neurons are the hardware, but that doesn't erase the reality of thought. You're collapsing the act into parts. Yes, mental life is correlated with the brain, but correlated with isn't identical to, and describing neural activity doesn't automatically explain meaning, truth, intentionality, aboutness, or rational inference. You gave ingredients and a mechanism. You didn't explain the form of thought or the end of reason, truth. Equating dependency with identity. Because X depends on Y, X is nothing but Y. Example 2, purpose. Purpose is just an illusion produced by natural selection. So you're explaining origin and calling that a refutation. Even if you explain how capacity developed, that doesn't prove the capacity is illusory. Explaining the evolutionary pathway of eyesight doesn't make vision unreal. Likewise, explaining how teleology is recognized or expressed doesn't automatically erase final causality. You still owe the argument that appears purposeful means it's not purposeful. The hidden bridge is, if a trait has a natural history, it can't be real in its higher meaning. That doesn't follow. That is a non sequitur. So you can ask calmly, are you describing the material or explaining the thing? Where did you account for form? What makes it this unified whole? Where did you account for end? What its powers are ordered toward? If they can't answer, it's reductionism. Okay, this is a different category of mechanisms. Smuggled frames and wrong demands. So the neutrality claim is actual metaphysical self-defeat. This whole section is actually metaphysical self-defeat. And I think I'm going to have to take a break. Yeah, I'll be back in a sec. Anybody in the chat? I'll be back, y'all.